In this video, I'm going to share a Caro-Kann variation that strives for a dynamic game rather than a positional one. This variation is played against the exchange Caro-Kann like this with the bishop on d3, in which you will play knight c6, g6, bishop g7. This can occur in a few different move orders, such as with the knight landing on f3 first, followed by knight c6, or with c3. The only exceptions are if the bishop lands on b5, pinning your knight, in which I would recommend resorting to the e6 setup, where you go bishop g4, e6, knight f6, bishop e7, and short castles. And the other exception is against any early c4s, such as the Panov. Okay, now let's go back to the main setup with the bishop on d3, pawn g6, pawn c3, bishop g7, short castles. Now you want to play this strange move, knight h6, which in the Lichess database, there's actually a 57% to 38% win rate in favor for black. Now what's the idea behind this move? Well, let's say white keeps developing. Castles, the idea here is to hide your knight on f7 by going pawn f6, knight f7, then e5, where the e5 square is supported by 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces, in which you will have a really solid center. And if white doesn't do anything about it, the center will fall under pressure really quickly. So let's demonstrate that real quick. So say knight a3, pawn f6, queen d2, knight f7, rook e1. Here comes the first trap with e5, which occurs when their dark squared bishop is on f4. Reason why this is a trap is, say they capture after the bishop moves, there's an inevitable fork on e4, which white will have to give up a minimum of one piece for 2 pawns, which also often results in a queen trade. However, if white escapes this trap by first dropping the bishop back to a square like g3, you'll always go e5 here, and after something like bishop e5, e4, white will often capture to allow the knight to land on d4 without losing an extra pawn here. So bishop takes, knight lands. Here your common developing moves are queen b6, knight e5 or d6, bishop d7 or bishop e6. Of course, it depends on where your opponent's pieces are placed. Rook f7, followed by rook f8, where the queen and the rooks can put pressure on the f2 pawn. This knight controls the d3 and c4 squares, and tactics will naturally arise. This is pretty much the position you're always going to be aiming for. However, there are moves that you do need to be aware of. So if your opponent plays an early bishop f4 and you haven't castled yet, what you want to do is to play f6 straight away, because otherwise they might go for queen d2 or queen c1, developing this battery in which the knight will need to move. And if you castled in the first place, the knight would have to resort to f5, where you would have to play a completely different position. The most challenging move white can play is c4. In this position, where the bishop is blunted by its own pawn, where black cannot put any significant pressure on the d4 pawn as of now. Now I almost never get this in my games, but if you do get this, what I want you to realize here is whenever your opponent plays c4, their d4 pawn is now extremely vulnerable since it's only protected by their kingside knight. So what we can do is play bishop g4, pinning the knight, they capture, we can take on d4. Best move here is bishop c4, which you need to play the h knight to f5, supporting everything. The last thing I want to cover is actually to consolidate once you're up a piece when you play this e5 trap, tempoing the bishop on f4. This is only if your opponent somehow avoids a queen trade with queen c2 or queen b3. Say queen c2, they fall into the trap here, and the best continuation is to take with the knight, And here you have a pretty exposed diagonal, and you're really only up 1 point since you have 2 pawns for a piece. Here I want you to remember a few moves, and in this order specifically, which is bishop g4, say they play rook d1, queen b6, the a rook to e8, and then knight e5, in which you will slowly activate your pieces, take control of these 2 open files, and should be able to consolidate without too many issues. And that's about it. Thank you for sticking around to the end. Hope you have great success with this opening and have a great day. Goodbye.